Yggdrasil explained, the world tree that feeds on the suffering of the gods. We are told the story of Yggdrasil, the mighty ash tree, the steed of Odin. Its branches reach into the heavens, its roots delve into the depths of all the realms, and its health is tied to the health of the universe itself. It is a beautiful, powerful symbol of interconnectedness, of life, of the enduring strength of the cosmos. But what if this is a profound misunderstanding of its true, horrifying nature? What if Yggdrasil is not a tree in the way we understand it? What if it is a living, breathing, and sentient organism that feeds not on water and light, but on a much darker and more potent form of sustenance? What if the world tree feeds on the suffering of the gods? Today, we journey to the very center of the 9 worlds, but we do not come to admire the great tree. We come to investigate it. This is a story not of a sacred ash, but of a cosmic predator. A story of how the greatest tragedies of the Norse gods, the binding of a wolf, the sacrifice of an eye, the death of a shining sun, were not just events in their history, but meals for the ancient, hungry being upon which their entire reality is built. Welcome to the Eldritch Codex. Today, we seek to explain Yggdrasil, not as the tree that holds the worlds, but as the great cosmic horror that is slowly and patiently devouring them. To understand the terrible, unveiled truth of Yggdrasil, we must first look at its anatomy, at the strange, and often seemingly contradictory, descriptions of the life that teems upon its branches and gnaws at its roots. The ancient texts, the poetic and prose Eddas, paint a picture of a tree in a state of constant eternal struggle. It is a being that is always suffering, always on the very brink of collapse, yet always miraculously enduring. At its very top, in its highest cloud-wreathed branches that are said to shade the golden, shield-roofed halls of Valhalla, sits a great, wise eagle, a being of immense size and ancient wisdom. The texts do not give him a name, for he is more of a function than a personality. And on the brow of this great, silent eagle sits a hawk, named Vedrfolnir, the wind-bleached or storm-pale, who sees all that happens in the 9 worlds. At its very bottom, in the dark, cold, misty realm of Niflheim, one of its 3 great roots is gnawed upon, ceaselessly and for all eternity, by a monstrous, draconic serpent named Nidhogg, the Malistriker. He is not alone. He is the king of a legion of lesser serpents. Grabak, Grafvalith, Goin, and Moinho all join him in his seemingly destructive task. And traveling up and down the great, world-spanning trunk of the tree, constantly, tirelessly, is a squirrel named Ratatoskr, the drill-tooth or tusk traveler. His only described function in the great sagas is to be a messenger of insults, a celestial agent of discord. He scurries from the serpent Nidhogg at the bottom to the great eagle at the top, carrying the dragon's hateful, venomous words. And then he scurries back down, carrying the eagle's proud, disdainful responses. He is a perpetual, chittering engine of animosity, ensuring that the hatred between the top and the bottom of the great tree never, ever fades. For great stags or harts also roam the highest branches. Their names Dane, Dvalin, Dunir, and Durathr, and they are constantly nibbling at the leaves and the tender buds of the great tree. And the trunk of the tree itself is said to be slowly, but surely rotting away from its side, a constant creeping decay. This is often interpreted, quite beautifully, as a poetic metaphor for the constant state of struggle and balance in the Norse cosmos. The forces of order and wisdom, the eagle at the top, the forces of chaos and destruction, the serpent, at the bottom, and the constant struggle between them, with the very tree of life caught in the middle, suffering but enduring. It is a powerful and elegant metaphor for the pagan worldview. But what if it is not a metaphor? What if it is a literal, biological description? The description of a vast cosmic organism and its complex, symbiotic, and ultimately parasitic ecosystem. Let us propose a new and terrifying theory. Yggdrasil is not a tree, not in the way we understand a tree of wood and leaves. It is a creature, a living, sentient organism of unimaginable age, perhaps the first living thing to sprout from the yawning primordial void of Ginnungagap, a being that exists on a scale so vast that the gods themselves, who live among its branches, cannot fully comprehend its true nature. They see a great cosmic ash tree because that is the only way their minds can process its immense transdimensional form. And like all living things, it must feed to survive. But a being of its scale, a being whose very body contains 9 separate worlds, does not feed on simple matter like water and light. It requires a more refined, more potent, and more efficient form of energy. It feeds on psychic and spiritual essence. And the most potent form of this energy, the richest and most flavorful, the most high-energy sustenance available in the cosmos, is not joy or peace or love. It is their opposites. It is suffering. It is tragedy. It is fear and hatred and loss and a glorious, heroic despair. It is the high-energy, emotional output of great, powerful beings in their moments of deepest, most profound agony and most noble and hopeless struggle. In this new, unveiled view, the creatures that live on the tree are no longer just random symbolic animals. They are a part of its biological system. They are its organs, performing vital functions for the survival of the greater organism. The great eagle at the top is its sensory organ. It is Yggdrasil's eye in the sky, its great, passive surveillance system, its hawk Vedrfolnir the very focus of its lens. It silently, patiently observes the 9 worlds, not out of simple curiosity, but to seek out potential sources of its next great meal. It watches the dramas of gods and men unfold, identifying the moments of greatest potential tragedy, the fault lines of pride and fear that can be exploited to create a grand, nourishing spectacle of suffering. The 4 stags that eat its leaves are not harming it. They are its gardeners. They are pruning it, stimulating new, tender growth, much like a gardener would prune a rose bush to encourage more beautiful and numerous blooms. They are keeping the pastures of the tree healthy and productive. And the great, monstrous serpent Nidhogg, gnawing at the roots in the darkness, he is not its enemy. He is not trying to kill the tree. He is a vital part of its digestive tract. He gnaws at the roots, yes, but not to destroy them. He gnaws at them to stimulate the flow of spiritual energy upwards, to tenderize the very foundations of the worlds, to keep the system from becoming stagnant and complacent. And his most important function, perhaps, is to consume the waste products of the tree's great, cosmic feeding. In the realm of Niflheim, it is said that Nidhogg gnaws on the corpses of the murderers, the adulterers, and the oathbreakers. What if these corpses are the spiritually inert, drained souls, the husks of those whose life essence, whose suffering, has already been consumed by the great tree? Nidhogg is not a destroyer. He is the cleanup crew, the final, grim stage of the digestive process. And the squirrel, the seemingly insignificant Ratatosker, with his endless, chittering insults, he is a nerve ending, a neurotransmitter. He is the system that keeps the entire organism in a state of perpetual low-level stress, of agitation, of tension. A state that is optimal for the creation and the release of the emotional energy it craves. He keeps the eagle, the senses, and the serpent, the digestive system, in a state of constant, seething animosity, ensuring that the tree, and the worlds within it, are never truly, deeply at peace. Yggdrasil, then, is not the passive, benevolent stage upon which the great drama of the Norse gods unfolds. It is the active, hungry, and infinitely patient predator that is orchestrating the entire drama for its own, eternal and terrible sustenance. It is a cosmic farmer, and the gods, for all their power and their glory, are merely its most prized and most tragic livestock. Edit. The great cosmic organism, Yggdrasil, had awakened from its long post-creation slumber, and it was hungry. It needed its first great meal to truly establish its power in this new age of the gods. And it did not have to wait long. The Aesir, the new, powerful gods of Asgard, a tribe of warriors, of kings, of lawgivers, were about to encounter another tribe of gods, the Vanir, and the clash between them would provide the world tree with its first, rich and delicious course of divine suffering. The Vanir were a different kind of deity. They were older, more tied to the earth, to the sea, and to the cycles of nature. They were the gods of fertility, of wealth, of prosperity, and of a deep, powerful, and often chaotic form of magic known as seer. They lived in their own realm, Vanaheim, a place of lush fields and prosperous shores. The story of the first great war between the gods begins, as so many tragedies do, with the arrival of a stranger. A Vanir goddess named Gulveig, which means gold drunkenness or gold power, came to the halls of Asgard. She was a powerful sorceress, a practitioner of the chaotic Vanir magic, and she was utterly, completely obsessed with gold. She spoke of nothing else. Her magic was designed to acquire it, her thoughts were consumed by it. The Aesir, the gods of order, of honor, of oaths and laws, were both fascinated and repulsed by her. They were a martial society. They valued strength, courage, and loyalty, and they looked upon Gulveig's singular, all-consuming greed, and they were disgusted. They saw her obsession not just as a personal flaw, but as a corrupting influence, a spiritual sickness that threatened the very fabric of their new, ordered society. And so, they decided to purify their home. They seized Gulveig, and in a great solemn assembly in Odin's hall, they threw her into the great roaring fire in the center of the room. The flames leaped up, consuming her, and she was burned to death. But from the ashes, she was reborn, whole, unblemished, and, some say, even more beautiful and more powerful than before. The gods, stunned and horrified, burned her a second time, and again, from the smoldering embers, she emerged, laughing. A third and final time they burned her, using all their divine might to ensure her destruction. And a third time she rose from the ashes, her power undiminished. The Aesir were terrified. This was a magic they did not understand, a form of life and rebirth that was completely alien to their own. And this fear, this terror of the unknown and the uncontrollable, led directly to the first great war between the two tribes of gods. A war that would rage for years, a war that would stain the golden fields of Asgard with divine blood. This is the traditional story, a story of a clash of cultures, of a conflict born from a disagreement over values. But let us now look at this story through the cold, hungry, and patient eyes of Yggdrasil. What if Gullveig was not just a greedy goddess acting on her own? What if she was an agent, perhaps even an unknowing one, of the world tree itself? A catalyst, a perfectly designed instrument of provocation, sent to the halls of Asgard to instigate a conflict? The tree needed to feed, and a war between the two most powerful divine families in the cosmos would be a feast of unparalleled proportions. Gullveig's obsession with gold was the perfect tool to create a rift between the two tribes, and her magical ability to be reborn from fire was the perfect way to ensure that the conflict, once started, would not be easily ended. She was not just a sorceress. She was a living, breathing, self-renewing insult to the Aesir's sense of order and power. Her very existence was a challenge they could not ignore and could not defeat. The war that followed was a banquet for the great tree. The divine rage of Thor as he swung his hammer, the fear of the Aesir as they faced the strange, chaotic magic of the Vanir, the sorrow of the mothers and wives on both sides, the acts of heroic, and often futile, sacrifice on the battlefield, the raw, untamed magical energies unleashed by both sides. All of it was a symphony of high-quality spiritual food for the great, cosmic predator. The tree did not care who won. It only cared that they fought. The long, bloody stalemate, a war that raged for years with neither side able to gain a decisive victory, was the perfect meal. It was a slow-release source of the emotional sustenance it craved. The tree was not just a silent witness to the war. It was the unseen force that had instigated it, and that was now feeding on it, growing stronger with every drop of divine blood that was spilled upon its roots. The war only came to an end when the gods themselves, exhausted, depleted, and on the brink of a mutually assured destruction, finally realized that they could not win. They declared a truce, and to seal the peace, to ensure that the two tribes would be forever intertwined, they exchanged hostages. The Vanir sent their greatest and most beloved gods to live in Asgard. They sent the sea god Njord and his two children, the god of the harvest and the sun, Freyr, and the goddess of love, beauty, and seer magic, Freya. And the Aesir, in return, sent two of their own to live in Vanaheim. They sent Odin's own brother, the handsome but indecisive god Honir, and to be his advisor, they sent the wisest of all beings, the ancient Mimir. The tree had been fed. The first great course of its meal was over. And now, the two tribes of gods were united into a single, larger, and more complex family. A family that was now, thanks to the machinations of the tree, capable of producing even greater, even more powerful, and even more potent tragedies in the future. The appetizer was finished, and the tree was now waiting for the main course. Edit. The great cosmic organism, Yggdrasil, had been fed by the Aesir-Vanir war. The conflict had been a rich and nourishing meal, but it was only an appetizer. The tree did not have to wait long for its next, and far more personal, course. The war had created a new, unified pantheon, but it had also planted the seeds of a new and profound anxiety. At the heart of this anxiety was the king of the gods himself, Odin, the All-Father. And his great, gnawing, intellectual hunger would provide the world tree with a feast of unparalleled and intimate suffering. Odin, now the king of a united, but scarred pantheon, became obsessed with a single terrible thought: the prophecy of Ragnarok, the end of all things. He knew, with a certainty that gnawed at his soul, that a final, unwinnable battle awaited him and his kin. He needed knowledge. He needed to see the future, to understand the threads of fate, to find some way, any way, to defy the doom that had been written for him. This obsessive quest for knowledge would drive him to make two of the most famous and most terrible sacrifices in all of mythology. First, as we have unveiled in a previous chronicle, he journeyed to the well of Mimir, which lies at the base of one of Yggdrasil's three great roots, the root that extends into the land of the giants, Jotunheim. He begged the ancient, wise guardian of the well, his own uncle Mimir, for a single drink from its waters, waters that were said to hold all the wisdom and knowledge of the cosmos. The price for such knowledge was absolute. It was a sacrifice of the self, a sacrifice of perception. The price was his own eye. Odin, in his burning, desperate thirst for foresight, made the sacrifice without hesitation. He took his own great spear, Gungnir, and with a terrible, silent, and excruciating act of will, he gouged out his own right eye. He held the ruined, bleeding orb in his hand, a testament to his unyielding, and perhaps foolish resolve. And he offered it to Mimir, who dropped it into the dark, still waters of the well. Why would the world tree, if the well is a part of its very root system, demand such a terrible physical sacrifice? Because the act itself was a source of immense, high-quality spiritual sustenance. It was not just the physical pain of the act, a pain that would make any lesser being scream for 1,000 years. It was the immense, intellectual, and spiritual agony of the knowledge he gained in that single terrible drink. The knowledge of the absolute, certain, and unavoidable nature of his own doom. The tree did not just want his eye. It wanted his despair. It wanted to feed on the moment a god first truly understood his own mortality. It was a meal of unparalleled richness, a feast of divine, existential horror. But even this terrible sacrifice and the even more terrible knowledge it brought, was not enough for Odin. His quest for knowledge, his desperate need to find some way to fight his fate, continued. He sought to understand the secrets of the runes, the ancient magical symbols that were not just an alphabet, but held the very keys to understanding, and perhaps to rewriting the fabric of reality itself. But the runes do not give up their secrets easily. They demand a sacrifice of an even greater, more profound magnitude. A sacrifice not just of a part of the self, but of the whole self. And so Odin performed his second and greatest act of personal sacrifice. He took his great spear, Gungnir, the same spear that would one day be his companion in his final battle, and he wounded himself with it, a symbolic act of self-destruction. And then, he hung himself from a great, wind-swept branch of Yggdrasil itself. For 9 days and 9 nights, he hung there, suspended between the worlds, a god hanging from the tree of life, a living, breathing sacrifice. He was without food, without water, his lifeblood dripping down onto the roots of the great tree below. He was in a state of self-induced, ritualistic death, a shamanic journey into the very heart of suffering and oblivion. On the 9th night, at the very edge of death, his consciousness fading, his spirit hovering on the brink, he finally saw them. In a flash of agonizing, ecstatic insight, the runes revealed themselves to him, their secrets, their power, their patterns burned into his very soul. He had won the knowledge he sought. But what was the true underlying nature of this great and terrible ritual? From the cold, hungry, and patient perspective of Yggdrasil, it was the ultimate act of communion. The All-Father, the most powerful and most complex of the gods, had literally, physically, and spiritually connected himself to the great tree. And for 9 days and 9 nights, the tree had fed directly on his divine suffering. It had drunk his pain, his hunger, his thirst, and the potent, magical energy of his near-death experience. It was a slow, deliberate, and incredibly powerful infusion of divine, agonized energy, a feast that nourished it to its very core. The tree did not give him the knowledge of the runes. The runes were always there, a part of the cosmic system. The tree simply, in exchange for this great personal feast of suffering, allowed him to see them. The sacrifice was not the path to the knowledge. The sacrifice was the price of the knowledge. And Yggdrasil, the great, silent, and ever-hungry predator, had once again been fed. And now it waited, its appetite whetted, for the main course. Edit. For a time after Odin's great sacrifices, a fragile and deceptive peace settled over Asgard. It was a golden age. The gods were united. Their power was at its peak, and they had a new shining symbol of their hope, a living testament to all that was good and beautiful in their world. The shining god, Baldur. But as we have unveiled, this very perfection, this absolute and unwavering light, was a dangerous imbalance in a cosmos that craved equilibrium. And the great tree, the silent cosmic predator, could not tolerate balance and peace for long. It needed drama. It needed conflict. It needed tragedy. It needed a main course for its endless, cosmic feast. The death of Baldur was Yggdrasil's masterpiece. The entire, tragic saga was not just a series of unfortunate events, but a perfectly orchestrated symphony of suffering, a drama designed to produce the maximum possible amount of high potency, divine emotional energy, the very sustenance upon which the world tree thrived. First came the fear, the appetizer for the great feast. Baldur's nightmares, the prophetic visions of his own death, sent a wave of psychic dread through all of Asgard. This was not just a single god's fear. It was a collective, existential terror that seasoned the entire realm, making it ripe for the tragedy to come. The tree fed on this fear, this new, delicious anxiety that had seeped into the golden halls. Then came the desperate, powerful hope. Frigg's great, frantic quest to extract a sacred oath from all things in creation was an act of immense, powerful, and ultimately futile love. The tree fed on this hope, on this powerful, maternal, and defiant energy, knowing, as it always did, that the hope was destined to be crushed, and that crushed hope is one of the most flavorful of all emotions. Then came the cruel game. The gods, in their arrogant relief, hurling their weapons at the now invulnerable Baldur. This was a release of joyous, triumphant, and prideful energy, a sweet and savory counterpoint to the bitterness that was to come. The tree drank in their laughter, their relief, their pride, all the while knowing that it was just a prelude to a far greater and more nourishing sorrow. And then the murder itself, the terrible, pivotal act, orchestrated by the cunning hand of Loki, using the blind god Hoder as his unwitting instrument, and the single, overlooked sprig of mistletoe as the fatal flaw in Frigg's great plan. This single event was a nexus of unparalleled, high-potency emotional output. There was the sudden, shocked disbelief of the gods as their shining light was extinguished. There was the profound, world-shattering grief of his mother, Frigg, and his father, Odin, a grief so powerful it could shake the very foundations of the cosmos. There was the innocent, horrified confusion of the unwitting killer, Hoder, a pure and terrible form of anguish. And there was the complex, triumphant, and yet, perhaps, even regretful motivation of the orchestrator Loki himself. The tree drank it all in, a complex, multi-layered feast of divine despair. But it did not end there. The failed attempt to bring Baldur back from the misty halls of Helheim was the final, exquisite seasoning on this terrible meal. The collective weeping of all the 9 worlds, of gods and men, of giants and dwarves, of the very stones and trees themselves, was a tidal wave of sorrowful energy that washed over the roots of Yggdrasil, nourishing it to its very core. And Loki's final, cruel and calculated betrayal, in the guise of the giantess Thok, refusing to weep, was an act of pure, distilled malice that was, to the tree, a delicacy beyond compare. And finally, the punishment of Loki, a punishment that would provide the tree with a long, slow, and continuous supply of sustenance. His binding in the dark cave, the serpent's venom dripping on his face, his eternal, unending agony. This was not just the justice of the gods. This was Yggdrasil ensuring that its feast would not end. Loki's endless, agonizing screams, the very earthquakes of Midgard, were a slow drip feeding tube of pure, divine torment for the world tree, a meal that would last for centuries, until the final great feast of Ragnarok itself. Every part of this great, central tragedy of the Norse myths was not just an event that happened upon the stage of Yggdrasil. It was an event that happened for Yggdrasil. It was the main course in a great and terrible cosmic feast, a feast that would leave the gods broken, divided, and perfectly poised for their final, self-fulfilling, and world-ending doom. Edit. And so, we must look upon the great world tree Yggdrasil, not as a symbol of life, of connection, of a stable and enduring cosmos. We must see it for what it truly is. The great, silent, and ever-hungry engine of tragedy. It is not a passive, benevolent entity, the stage upon which the great drama of the Norse gods unfolds. It is not necessarily evil, not in the way we understand it. A great wolf is not evil for hunting a deer. A great storm is not evil for sinking a ship. It is simply their nature. And Yggdrasil's nature is to feed on the great, epic stories of the cosmos. And it knows, with a cold, ancient, and terrible wisdom, that the greatest, most memorable, and most nourishing stories are always the tragedies. It is a great cosmic dramatist, and it demands that its actors, the gods and the giants and the men, give the performance of a lifetime, a performance that will end, as all great performances do, in their own glorious and very, very nutritious death. The entire saga of the Norse gods, from their first bloody war between the Aesir and the Vanir, to the terrible personal sacrifices of their great king, Odin, to the tragic, heartbreaking death of their most beloved son, Baldur, is a story that is being orchestrated by, and for, the tree. And the final, great, and terrible event, the Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, will be its final and greatest feast. The death of Odin, swallowed whole by the great wolf Fenrir, will be a release of ancient, kingly, and prophetic energy. The fall of Thor, poisoned by the world serpent, will be a great, final burst of noble, heroic, and thunderous power. The mutual destruction of Loki and Heimdall will be a perfect, balanced meal of chaos and order. And the burning of the 9 worlds by the fire giant, Surtur, will be the great, final, and cleansing fire that cooks the meal to perfection. All of it will be a release of cosmic, emotional energy so immense, so potent, that it will feed the great tree for eons to come. It will allow it to slumber in peace, fat and contented, until a new world, and a new set of gods, have grown strong enough and tragic enough to provide its next great meal. Yggdrasil is not the tree of life. It is the tree of stories. And it knows that the best, most powerful stories are always the sad ones. The gods believe they are fighting for their lives, for their world, against a cruel and predetermined fate. But they are, in truth, merely fattening themselves up for the final, inevitable, and glorious harvest. They are the beautiful, tragic, and heroic characters in a great, cosmic play. A play that is being written, directed, and ultimately, consumed by the very stage upon which they stand. Sometimes, the stage upon which a great tragedy unfolds is not a neutral backdrop. Sometimes, it is the most ancient and the most hungry character of all. Thank you for joining us on this journey to the very heart of the Norse cosmos. If this unveiling of the world tree has changed your perspective on the great sagas, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the Eldritch Codex, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the darkest and most secret of all our legends. What other sacred place in mythology, a place like the Garden of Eden, or the great Mount Olympus, do you believe holds a more sinister, hidden purpose? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, be wary of the stories you find yourself in. You may just be a character in a play being written for a much, much older and much, much hungrier audience.